You cannot expect the person to wake up and be a leader. You have to nurture them. You have to develop them. You have to be intentional with them. But you cannot expect the person with no strings on their shoes to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Sometimes we all need a helping hand, and it may not cost you a lot of money, but it does cost you intentionality, and you have to care about others.
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners. Today, I am honored to welcome a really dear friend of mine to the Business of Advice podcast. BJ Thompson is a life coach, speaker, author, and founder of Build a Better Us, which is a growth and development organization for both people and families. More than anything, I think for so many of the advisors that listen to this, his business model is very similar to yours. And as he's grown that, we're going to talk through some of the challenges there. So BJ, my friend, thanks for making the time to join me today.
Thanks for having me, Cody. Excited to be here.
You ready to jump in?
Yeah, I am.
Let's do it. So I always like starting a little bit for people who may not know you with your background. You have a really cool background and story. You and Lecrae started or were very instrumental in what they call the 116 movement. That's actually how you and I met, through Lecrae. You've written a ton of books. Now you're leading a coaching organization. Why don't you start off, just tell us a bit of your story and how you got here today?
Good question. So I am a Dallas native, not a Cowboy fan or hater. Born to a mother who had me at 17 years old. Dad left school in the 10th grade. I'm the oldest of three. And I navigated gang culture my entire life. So I grew up in the middle of gang culture as it was bubbling, forced to navigate it, moved to Denton to undergrad, hour away from where I was from. And I immediately realized nothing that I had learned, most of the things I had learned up until that point, did not transfer, right? So much of my adult life I've spent having to restructure, re-understand what life is around personal development, emotional intelligence, deciding how to interact with your purpose. What does it mean to have great mentors? And so much of what the coaching organization has become is really the byproduct of my own life, having to really just struggle through these things and to do it as a Black man in America. So very excited about that. But the thing that I would say is I realize that anybody can become a leader. So that's literally what I have learned over these last 22 years.
What has been, and this wasn't one of the questions I was going to ask, but even if you go through there, what have been some of the biggest challenges for you as you've developed into such a great leader today?
That's a great question. So one of the things, I think we were talking about this offline, is I grew up in a community that only encouraged you to play sports. So if you were good at sports, and I was terrible at sports.
I've seen you swing a golf club.
Look, I was terrible at sports. So I was joking with my daughter. I told her, I was like, I used to ride the bench in high school. I used to sit on the bench. I used to drink up all the Gatorade from the other players. And so I literally did not think that I had a future because I was not good at sports. And I wasn't the top student at school. And so in a lot of ways, I think one of the greatest challenges is you're given very limited options on who you can become. And so that's really one of the biggest hurdles that I've had to overcome is how do I, as a Black man in America, overcome a lot of these stereotypes that say I can only be an athlete or I have to be this great, kind of exceptional student that, somehow goes to MIT and these different things. And I think what I realized is that, man, if I would have developed just some kind of basic skills around, my talent and business, I would have been much more successful than what I would even recognize.
So it may have taken you a little bit longer because of that, but you have turned yourself into
a
great entrepreneur. One of the questions, oftentimes I think that is something that we've seen modeled by others at some point. As an example, both of my grandparents were entrepreneurs. It always seemed like something fun to me. How did your upbringing, I know you talked about some of the challenges, but were there some role models in there that helped you start thinking differently about entrepreneurship?
It's a great question. We didn't call it entrepreneurship. You know this. This was the new concept. A lot of that Gary Vee kind of, thinking, using the word specifically entrepreneurship.
Yep.
And we never called it that. But when I look back at it, my grandfather started a shop. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. right? And I didn't even think I connected the dots probably until the last 2 years. I was like, man, that shop down the street was my grandfather's. He owned it. He owned real estate. He started businesses, but we didn't call it entrepreneurship. We call it trying to get out of the neighborhood, right?
Yep.
And then I look back at my uncles. Think back at my uncles who grew up in a tough neighborhood, and that entrepreneurship was, they were street pharmacists. So they did illegal entrepreneurship, but it was still entrepreneurship. And so I realized that entrepreneurship is really in my blood, right? I have kind of come up in this family of entrepreneurship. And I remember my first entrepreneurial idea was cutting grass at the age of 12 years old, walking up and down the street, mowing lawns. And I remember thinking to myself, if I could just get enough money to buy the shoes that I want, to get the clothes that I want, then I would be excited. And so we started a company. It failed pretty miserably, pretty fast. But my first beginnings of entrepreneurship was just saying, I don't like the existing circumstances of my life. I want to change it. So let me take a risk.
This is another question that I know I didn't send you in advance, but you just said something there that I want you to maybe expand upon. I feel like most of the entrepreneurs I meet, or so many of them, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them have something like that. They see something that they don't like, or they want something to change or be different, and that tends to be a driving force. Any ideas or thoughts you have around how to use some of those setbacks or adversity or things that you're seeing that you don't like to drive you as you continue to grow and develop as a leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the things is you kind of have to hit a breaking point. You really need to get to a place. I remember many of times I came to a close, but then it took very specific times in my life. There was a time when I was working for a university, and I never forget them calling us all into a room and saying 50% of you guys are going to be laid off today. And I just remember the devastation that I felt. I had put so much money and energy into my education, into my development, into my talent. And I realized that I had no control. And I think that it was kind of the breaking point for me to say, I need to do something that I have much more control in, that allows me to get out the results that I desire. And I'm not so subject to an org chart, a company that's failing, a leader that may not necessarily know what they're doing as they lead this organization. I need to kind of chart my own waters in some ways. And so I think some of the advice that I would say is that you get to these places where you have to just say, I don't like this feeling. It feels very uncomfortable to be laid off in a room. And I had a family at the time. At the time, I had 3 kids, wife. I had this whole group and community depending on me. And here I was, I'm losing my livelihood because the CEO, right, had just decided one day in a meeting that this was no longer profitable for what they were doing. So I think some of the entry points of entrepreneurship is that you just have a bad experience. Yeah.
Well, and I think we've seen that. I was just reading, I think in Forbes, that 2020 was the largest year ever for new business startups, right? That people use that kind of adversity to go decide to do something different. And I think it's even, you're seeing that into 2021 also. So I think the challenge that you and I have talked so much about offline is so many of these people aren't equipped with the tools to go build and run that business successfully. And it's why I think that that idea of just constantly learning and being in the environment around other great people is going to be so important going forward. When all these new small businesses are started and they don't have that background and they don't have that environment, it leads to a lot of small business failure also, unfortunately.
Yeah, you just got to try. I think that this is the thing. A lot of times, many of these ideas, I was going back and listening to John Maxwell talk about this, and he said, you just have to do it as you go.
Yep.
Oftentimes we're kind of waiting on this magical moment for things to just work themselves out. And this is what I've learned as a coach. You don't know what you don't know until you start taking the journey of faith. And as you take the journey of faith, this is when you discover, man, I need a coach. I need a mentor. I need a structure. I need a system. I need to focus on the things that give me most return on investment. I need to define my value proposition. And so I think that sometimes it is just starting. right? It's not thinking about starting, it's starting. And then as you start, that's when things begin to develop. And so one of the things that I have found in my life is, Cody, I never thought that I would be this type of person because my apprehension towards starting always overcalculated the risk in my mind. I could not imagine what the tangible risk looked like in real life. And so until I got into it in real life, I was like, oh, the thing that I was scared of is not actually the thing that's scary. This is scary because the thing that I'm realizing as I go along, that's the thing I need to focus on. It's not the thing that I imagined. So what I would say is, you're exactly right. 2020 brought about an entire new group of people who said, hey, these corporations are laying us off. They're deciding that, we're not an essential worker. This is when we learned you were not an essential worker. We never heard that term before. I thought I was an essential worker. You thought you were an essential worker until your company said you are not essential to what you are. And I think a lot of people decided in that year, hey, I want to take a risk on me. I'm done taking a risk on this company. And if I'm going to take a risk on me, it means learning who I am. It means defining clearly my value proposition. It means creating systems and teams that allow me to scale up. And it also means that I need to manage those things. So, yeah, what you think, Cody?
I like it. I remember you and I texting about this, and there's that J. Cole lyric on his new album where he says, if I'm betting on myself, I'll completely double down. Woo! And I think as an entrepreneur, that's what you're doing, right? You're taking a bet on yourself, but I think it's also it has become very glamorous. You talked about Gary Vee and others that have made entrepreneurship seem like this glamorous thing, but it can also be a very exhausting mentally, physically, emotionally. So I'm going to use that as maybe a transition to talk about one of the things that you do best. Build a Better Us is really, I don't want to say completely built around the idea of personal care, but there's a lot of that in it. And even when you came in and spoke to our employees, probably a couple of years ago now, I guess it was, that was the big theme is as leaders, as entrepreneurs, how, you spend so much time trying to build and nurture your business, your clients, your employees, but oftentimes don't do a very good job taking care of yourself. How do you coach people to address making sure that they're taking care of themselves first? And why is that important?
Yeah, let me tell you why I started. Again, multiple degrees, master's degrees. I've gone through every training program you can imagine. I've gone through every self-assessment, personality test you can imagine. I've literally run the gamut. And I have ran and developed pretty much every type of program, service, everything you can imagine. And this is what I recognize. In 2013, my father passed away unexpectedly from a stroke. As I have reflected on his life, I think back on the fact that my dad would work. Again, remember I said earlier, he dropped out of school in the 10th grade.
Yep.
And I came from a strong family. Again, I may not have had the most money, but I came from a loving home. And that's one thing that I want to say is that my family was actually intact. One thing I've reflected over the years with my father was that he would help everyone but himself, right? So my dad would actually give you the shirt off of his back. He would actually help you. I remember thinking about my dad working 60 to 80 hours a week in freight. And I remember on weekends, he would wake up to help people move. And I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? Why are you waking up on Saturday morning after you have spent 80 hours working to help someone else? But that was the kind of philanthropist he was. That was the type of generous man he was. When I look back on it and I think about, man, where did this train get off the track? Cody, the train got off the track because yes, he was philanthropic, and yes, he was generous, and yes, he was a hard worker, but the person that never got cared for was him. And so I look up as a professional, as someone who speaks, travel, write, coach, and I'll never forget thinking to myself, I'm on the same track. I help everybody but myself. And it was very challenging and personally convicting that I had no margin in my life. I had allowed myself to grow distant from my children because I was building structures and systems. I was not eating healthy. I was not taking rest. And I was not delegating tasks that did not center specifically on me. And I think that was the real like watershed moment for me where I said, this is not sustainable. If I attempt to do this for the next 20 to 30 years, my life will be lived shortly after this. And so one of the specific key, ideas is the organization or the company or the endeavor, the product or the service is only as healthy as you are personally. If you are not taking time to take care of you, you are literally running the organization into the ground. I think that's one of the greatest challenges for entrepreneurs who become owner operators, is that if you can't make that correlation, you're going to see it too late, right? Because you're so deep into it. Maybe you guys are making great profits. Maybe you guys are scaling well and you're building great teams. But if you don't feel like, your work-life balance is well, your kids don't like you, your spouse or your significant other doesn't like you, you don't feel like you're getting rest, you don't feel like you're going fishing. Cody, you're supposed to plan out a fishing trip. Okay, never mind. If you don't have these margins in your own life, your business is only a reflection of who you are. And I think that was the aha moment for me, is that the business is an echo of my personal life. Yeah.
It's I literally just had this conversation with one of our advisors. Has been crushing it, been on this great tear, but he said that he's like, I've got to figure some of these things out. And a lot of them do, right? They realize that so much of it's building a team around you, being able to delegate. And that's the jump that he's got to make. It's the jump that almost every entrepreneur has to make. When it's your business and your baby, it's hard to let go of some of those things and trust, but it's the only way you can, as you build an organization, can get some of that margin. Let me ask you this question. So as a leader, what are some of the most important things that they can do to be taking care of themselves?
Ooh, this is so great. So we're talking about the personal development pieces. And this is where, Build a Better Us really shines. We talk about the concept called integration. The work-life balance is based off integration, which means I can't just do one thing at a time. I have to do several things well at a time. That means managing your mental health. Right? You feel yourself gaining anxiety and worry. It's like you have to pinpoint the core ideas and core concepts that are causing that. Maybe that's you getting a counselor. Maybe that's you getting a coach. Maybe that's you turning off the television. We joke about this, right? But I'm not heavy into sports. I'm not heavy into television. I'm a reader, right? And that's very contrary to much of what I was brought up on.
Yep.
Part of that intentionality is around my mental health, right? If I consume too many things that cause me worry, anxiety, I feel like I'm missing out, then I then begin to stress. So one is mental health. Two, it's interpersonal relationships. Do you have friends, right? Cody, you know this, as a leader and executive, there's one thing for people to need you, and it's another thing for people to love you and want you. Right? You have to develop the relationships where people celebrate you for being you. They don't need you, right? You bring value to the relationship, but they don't need you as the boss. They don't need you as the leader. They don't need you as these things. They love you for who you are. And so taking time to develop that so that you don't age into isolation, because ultimately isolation puts you on an island where you're unable to make coherent decision-making. And you find yourself living a lesser quality in life, right? Third thing is your ability to be present, right? When we are unable to be present as a person, it's because we do not value the moment, right? As we develop these things, it's like, I just want to have gratitude in this moment with you. I want to connect with my friend and say, man, I'm just grateful to be here. Not just because I am so inadequate in myself. I recognize that I need to seize the time that is in front of me. I can't just worry about what's ahead. I can't worry about what's in past. I want to seize this moment right here and go, how much value can I add to you as we add value to one another? Fourth thing that I would say is your diet. Right? I think that's kind of one of the unseen things. I'll tweet this a lot. that there is a grave connection. There's a significant connection between mental health and food. And the reason being is because what you choose to eat or not eat affects your microbiology, your gut health. This is some of the microbiology thoughts. Your gut health goes into your cells, and your cells flows into your blood, and your blood flows into your brain. If your receptors are not firing off, you can have chemical depression. It can create stress, worry, and anxiety. And so being intentional about what you eat actually reduces your stress, as it actually reduces your depression, and it gives you a less of a memory fog. And so I would say if you could just start with those 4 small things of just trying to create one habit of intentionality around each one of those things, you'll find that as you show up every day to this product, this service, or this company, that the quality of life and your thinking will be much better, and you'll be more excited and prepared for the long haul.
Those are great tips. Let me use this as maybe an opportunity for you to talk about something else that you've done through Build a Better Us. But this kind of leads back to the situation with your father, and I think some of the things that you started researching around that. But you created this 45-day total transformation challenge that is just, man, it's actually, you and I go back and forth a lot on social media, but watching the testimonies of people who have lost, tons of weight and just transformed their life has been a big part of that. Talk about I know that challenge focuses a lot on diet, but it's not just about that. Maybe talk about the 45-day challenge, and if someone knows that they need to get in shape, this is an opportunity for them to see a really easy way that they can do that too.
Yeah. So we started this. So Cody, we started this challenge based off of the idea that people do not take care of themselves, and they need to, right? It started with seeing the reality with my dad. So one of the things that sobered me up in 2013 was when my dad passed away from a stroke, heart attack. He was not sick. He was not overweight, right? He was not any of these things. And I remember just being in complete shock. Like, I don't understand why you're gone. But what I recognized was 2 things. One, he had a poor diet, and he was not taking any time for self-care. And so the program was actually written. I actually wrote this program based off of those concepts, that you have to change your diet, and you have to start creating healthy routines of self-care. So we wrote this program basically, and when I wrote it, it's so interesting because I didn't know it was going to take off like that. I've served thousands of people with this program. I had no idea that it would be such a big deal. But the program just basically said, we want you to take care of you, and we want to give you a very simplistic formula to do so, even if you have a busy life. And so if you go to 45daytransformation.com, you'll get to see the program. But what it basically says is you need to have a healthy mental life, a healthy physical kind of eating regimen. And then we also want you to have a healthy spiritual life. Because remember this, that even though we are physical beings, we are this invisible essence called a soul. And that soul means that we are souls living in a body that demands soul care. Now, again, it's not specifically around any type of religion, but it just acknowledges that we are energy, right? And that energy has to be nurtured and cared for. And so as we wrote this program, just what you said, we get these crazy, I'm so blown away by this. I get text messages, DMs all the time where people just go, I cannot believe this is this simple. 1, 2, I can't believe I feel great. And it's because it's based off of microbiology.
Yep.
It's based off of the concepts of neurology. Basically, it's called neuroplasticity, like the ideas of your brain. And it's based off of principles around spiritual formation that allow you to bring those 3 together in just very quiet habits every single day. And so, I think that's why people are blown away by it. But I said, if I was to create a program that would have saved my dad's life, right? That's the emotional part. What would I do? And that's why it's so simple. I said, my dad was not going to do a bunch of weird, over the top HIIT workouts, eating regimens. If my dad's life was to be saved, what would he need? And that's what the program is. It's 45 days of you being intentional with your health and becoming a better version of yourself.
What I love about it, as we've talked about it, I think it's one of those things so many people, and I'll transition this into the business side, are looking for this magic solution. But the reality is, whether it's getting in shape, taking better care of your mental health, or growing a organization and scaling it, it's actually usually these simple things done well consistently over time that lead to this growth. And that's, I think, what some people, and you and I have talked about it, it's not that hard. It's just the habit of consistently doing the right thing or making the right decision there. Let me transition that a little into the idea of using those same principles to grow and scale an organization. As our advisors that we work with grow their practice and try and scale an organization, they face something very similar that I know you faced as you've scaled Build a Better Us. And that's early on, you were the coach, you were the face, you were the operator. Now you've been able to scale it out and build a network of coaches. What did that process look like for you? What were some of the challenges as you moved from just you to relying on others that everyone else who's trying to do that can learn from?
I'm going to give you this illustration. I had a very real illustration happen in real life. So I went to this restaurant one day. I kept hearing about how incredible this restaurant was. So I go to visit and I walk in and there's just a woman in this business like serving. So I'm kind of shocked. I'm sitting in this room by myself. It's a Friday evening. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, is this the restaurant I keep hearing about? She's like, oh yeah, this is it, blah, blah. And I saw the signage outside. I walked inside and then remember, it's just me. It's her and I in this restaurant. So she takes my order. She walks to the back and starts cooking. Phone rings. She walks back over to answer the phone. So she's doing a to-go order. As she finishes that up, she comes back over and she busts the tables. So I'm like, okay, cool. She's busting the table. Then she walks to the back to start cooking food, right? I'm sitting here and I'm really confused. I cannot believe that I'm in this restaurant, just she and I, right? She comes back and she walks back over to me. And I'm just like, and this is a true story. I'm kind of sitting started like, this is so weird. Like, why am I the only person in this restaurant by myself? And she walks back over and she's like bringing my food back after like 20 minutes. And I said, hey, I was pulling up here and I wasn't sure if you were open because that sign that says open is off. And she freaks out, Cody. True story. She freaks out. She's like, oh my God, I forgot to plug in the open sign. Right? In that moment, this is what happened to me. I remember just this quiet voice saying, this is how you're trying to run your company. You have this great idea, you have great food, but you're trying to do it by yourself and you're making grievous mistakes, right? This is what kind of caused me to start delegating that, right? I recognize that when you have something that is exceptional, that's beautiful, that's big, it is not individual focused. The individual is a catalyzer for that idea. They're not the totality of that idea. Your value proposition has to be so clear, but the vision has to be bigger than yourself. Cannot be about you. You are just the beginning of those things. And so one of the ways that we scale was I had to start saying, if we're going to do well and it's going to reach the masses, it's going to demand that we put people in operations, that we hire other coaches, that we decenter what's called founder syndrome, right? That we're not just getting clear on our value proposition, but that we're removing the founder as a whole and we are replacing it in the form of core values, right? And I would also say this, it required that I then coach leaders, right? Because you can't lead. There's kind of 5 stages of leadership. Taking notes, 5 stages. First stage is leading yourself. Second stage is leading other people. Third stage is leading other leaders. Fourth stage is leading organizations. Fifth stage is leading movement. If you cannot do those things, you are not going to be successful as a leader. And what I recognized early on was that I was trying to lead organizations without learning the skills of leading myself, leading orgs, and leading leaders. And so one of the ways that you remove yourself from the founder syndrome, which means you have to be in everything at all times, is it means that I have to take the time to begin to concisely write out what processes are, right? Because if BJ has to show up to everything, that means that the things that I'm best at, I can't show up for. So I'm best at podcasts. I'm best at giving presentations. I'm best at writing books. I'm best at coaching. I'm not best trying to run the monotony of our account. I'm not best at trying to create structure around these things. And so now I had to concisely write out exactly what someone else needed to do. And I needed to find the right people to do so. And so I know you guys talk a lot about this, but one of the keys to scaling a company is finding the right people. It's not about these things. And I have a lot of horror stories, Cody. I have a lot of horror stories of, people who I put in place that literally were just placeholders. They were not people who were adding value to the specific endeavor that I was putting in place for. And I think what I recognized is like my insecurity as a leader would not let me say, hey, if you are not up to par with this, then we just need to find you a different place or move you out of the organization, right? Because what ends up happening is I have to follow up. And because I know these procedures, now I'm working your job while working my job. Mm-hmm. And that is no longer acceptable. I am no longer going to do my job in your job at the same time. And I'm paying you to do this, right? So I think just that transition of saying like, okay, if you cannot fulfill they call them KPIs.
Yep.
Key performance indicators. If you cannot do these KPIs in a 30, 60, 90-day window, I need to stop wasting time with you, right? Yeah, what you think, Cody? I know you do this a lot.
I think one of the things that so many people have a challenge with that's an entrepreneur is you remember the horror story of the person you hired who didn't do it, and then you tell yourself like everyone's going to be that way. But the reality is the only thing that will free you up as you grow and scale is to hire great people and delegate stuff to them. I think one of the mistakes that I see made, and I know we've talked about this some, is, well, maybe two things. One is hiring someone and immediately dumping everything on them before you're able to see how they do and trust them. So I've seen some people, they're so anxious to get rid of it, they give the person everything before the person's proven that they're the right fit, and then it ends up backfiring on them. But I think the other one is, and this may be the more common one, is not being super clear on what the expectation is for that person as you bring them on. So I think the more clear you can be around that, the better they'll tend to do if they know what their job is and how you're going to evaluate them doing their job. So as you keep growing this, give me some insights on what issues you're currently working through and any steps that you're going to take to kind of make that next leap.
That's a great question. So one of the things that I recognize as a growth and development organization is that we have to bring on great coaches that can lead communities. It's one thing to have a product or a service. It's another thing to have a subscription. And I think that, as we grow and scale, we want people to see that there's longevity. We're not just here to walk with you in one specific season. We can transition and pivot to new seasons. And so one of the challenges for me now is, how do I take what I know that works with people and then again, put it on paper? Like, it's easy for me to say, oh, I can get a group of people and they will follow me and I could help build out, specifically the value proposition or service that I'm doing. It's another thing for me to have to become a coach to people who have the potential and are in the place where they will scale a particular program, product, or philanthropy. And so one of the challenges is getting those processes down, getting those systems down to where they're airtight. Mm-hmm. There's no gaps. There's no lack of handoff. And I think this is where a lot of people struggle, is that, they say, I'll just do it, right? Well, if you just imagine yourself as a leader and you recognize I'm very limited in what I can do, now I have to bring competent people on for this to scale maturely. Now I have to have concise programs and precise, if I'm going to do digital products, like we're doing digital products right now, I have to have a solid funnel. It cannot just be this kind of like thrown together thing. And I think that's what happens when it's like, you get to this place where you're kind of making money, not making money, and just kind of like throw things together. Now I have to find consultants. Now I have to find mentors. Now I have to find people at the next level to help me get to the next level. It's not about me winging it. And I think one thing that's challenging is like, you have to recognize when you've hit your ceiling for your natural wiring. Here's what I mean. If you have done everything you possibly can in a specific season of life to grow a product, a program, a service, operations, and it does not grow and it's starting to fail, you need a consultant, you need a coach, you need a mentor. You cannot continue on doing what you're doing, right?
Yep.
And so for us, we have hired, again, this is something I never thought. Remember, I grew up being told I should just play basketball, play football, I should rap, or I should be the brightest student. I had no idea you hit these places where you have to hire. You need to have enough margin in your business to hire consultants, to hire contractors, to bring people in that can scale what you're doing in a very specific way that's going to give you the greatest ROI or return on investment. So for us, this is what it's been. And specifically in this season, we have been doing this with our products. We have a strong program with our, challenge. What about a challenge? But a lot of them have just been word of mouth leads, hot leads, no marketing, no anything. And this program has grown and touched thousands of people, right? We hit that ceiling and that wall. And we start saying, man, what do we do next? Well, Cody, we had done everything we could do. Mm-hmm. So now we recognize, we need to hire an outside marketing agency that can come in, look at our business model, look at our product. Now, listen, it's going to hurt. You know this as a leader, it's going to hurt. Because you were doing everything you thought you knew to do. And when those consultants come in, they mince up everything you got. They make you feel really, I'm not saying to make you feel small, but they just show you the most obvious gaps.
Yep.
And then you have to have the humility to be led into be redirected in a way that will give you scale. And so I would say that's kind of where we are now, is that as a budding organization in the growth and development space, we're realizing, man, we have hit our ceiling in some ways. And it's not necessarily just about who we are contracting, who are we hiring. It's us hiring consultants to come in to look at the specific product, program, or philanthropy is what we do. And then for them to give us critical assessments, for them to do a brand brief, of some sorts. And then to us to give us a new funnel that helps us scale up in a way that will allow us to have longevity.
Man, it's interesting hearing you say that. One of the things we talk about, like our mission here, is to help good advisors become great business owners. And what almost always happens, we get a lot of really big advisors that move to us, but they tend to move when they've plateaued, right? They got it to a certain level by themselves. And then they look around at the organization they're at and they're like, well, I'm the biggest advisor here. There's nobody else to learn from. They'll come over here when that frustration sits in and they realize there's got to be other people that have figured out how to break through these plateaus. Then they come over here and see all these advisors that are 3, 4, 5 times bigger that they can learn from. And that's such a big part of it. So appreciate you sharing that. It's something that I see, I think, with so many entrepreneurs is you hit kind of that ceiling of complexity you can't break through. And if you don't find someone who can help you understand and see what it is that you're missing, typically you're not going to get through that. You'll just work more and be more frustrated. So let me change topics a little in the sake of time, and mainly because I know this is a really important topic for you and for me. It's the conversation you and I probably have the most or talk the most about. But I want to talk a little bit about challenges as a minority leader. And I want to specifically talk a little bit about financial advisors too. So in our industry, if you look at, I think NerdWallet had a article talking about this, that Black financial advisors are drastically underrepresented in our industry compared to the overall U.S. demographics. I think CFPs, like Black CFPs, make up less than 2% of the total population there. So this is a big deal because I think this is something you and I have talked a lot about as financial education. But big question I would ask you is, do you see any ways that our industry can increase Black representation?
That's great. So, a few years ago, we were doing the marches and the George Floyds and all these different things. I know that a lot of people saw it as just a political movement. I saw it as a cultural opportunity, right? And a cultural opportunity to have a conversation about representation and who is represented at the table, specifically in the places of power. And so as a lot of that data was coming out, because I don't know if you remember this, a lot of that data was spilling out saying like, oh, there's less than 1%.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think that was like the topic. I don't think people were attempting to do that. But a lot of us were forced to be introspective and to get very specific about the analysis of where things were. When you start hearing this data about 1%, 2%, I thought, man, this should really wake us up, right? To say we need to do something very different. And you and I were having this conversation last year, and I said, until there is an intentional structural change, I don't care how many streets you paint, I don't care how many statues you put up, we are not moving the needle. And that's not even what we do in business, right? Like we don't even say, oh, if we just paint the street, put up the statues, changes happen. We say, no, what's represented in our bank account? What's represented on our org chart, what's represented in our chair and our boardrooms, that's where the real changes happen. And so I think that one of the challenges that we have to say is that in some ways we have unknown biases, right? And that's very hard to stomach because it can be very indicting. It can feel very like unnecessary. But I think until you can say that out loud and acknowledge it, then you cannot be intentional about it. The same thing that we do with gender. We look around and see there's not enough women at this table represented in voices. We have to say, it cannot just be there's not enough qualified.
Yep.
Right? We have to say in some ways, maybe we're not being intentional enough. That's not a personal indictment. That's kind of the cultural shift that we need to make in a ways that we are trying to be intentional, and we're saying, no, we will have this many people represented so that we do not end up extinct, right? So one of the things I want to say to people specifically about minority representation in your data, in your boardrooms, in your organizations, you don't want to just do it because it's like the cool diversity thing. I'm not going to be a diversity hire. You want to do it so that your business is not extinct. You want to do it so that your business gets the best ideas from a fluid, changing culture and world. So actually, it's more financially lucrative for you to have those types of representation, specifically in your organization, on your board, in your org chart, and in your company long term. But I would say in order to do that, you have to be intentional. You have to say, we will hire people from this background in order to make sure that moving forward, we have a sound company that allows us to survive the future, right? And so I would say if you do it for nothing else, do it for self-preservation, right? But I would just say also, just kind of last thing, you have to recognize the gap. So one of the things that's very challenging for me is I step in to these meetings and these boards, all these things, And people expect for me to have the same type of resources. And it's hard, Cody, because I have to try to go back and explain to them, like, y'all systematically made sure I did not have the resources.
Mm-hmm.
So now as I'm having the conversation with you, had this anticipation that I'm supposed to have all of this backing. And I'm saying, but the country made sure that we did not. And I think that this is why even, allowing yourself to have a humility to say, maybe there is a reason why this is, and the stats do not reflect that. So there has to be the opportunity for me to say, BJ has the potential, he has the presence, and he may have some of the wherewithal to do these things, but there is a margin of learning curve that he's going to have in order to fill in this gap. And I think that this is where we are supporting one another with an essence of equality, right? It's, hey, look, I ain't treating you like a baby. I'm not pretending like, things have been fair, because they have not been fair whatsoever. I'm trying to meet you where you are, look and assess the talent that you have, put you in the right position, but then expect great things that will allow us to scale. And I think that if we can do that, we will build more diverse cultures, but it won't be in the name of diversity. It will really be in the name of building the best types of teams that give us vantage points from different perspectives and then allow us to be able to be brighter and brighter in the future.
Would you maybe just walk through for everyone that listens, just some of the challenges that you faced as a minority entrepreneur, nonprofit leader? Just you and I have had a lot of those conversations, but I think it's an eye-opening opportunity to talk through some of those.
Yeah, so less than 1% of all philanthropic dollars go to minority-owned organizations. So one of the things that I found out very quickly as someone does growth and development work, specifically faith-based growth and development, I recognized very quickly as I went to raise funds, people like, what are you talking about? Right? So it's like, what? I don't understand. Why don't you trust me? And I had no idea how much implicit bias plays into this thing, right? I also think, when you look at, prototypes of people who should be on your board or people who should have a voice in your organization, it is very challenging to reimagine what a person of color's vantage point is. So my vantage point is not your vantage point, right? We have two different cultural experiences. Even though we're both human beings, we have two different nature and nurtures. Now again, friendship and love allows us to connect, but we see things differently. And I think that rub for people feels like, oh, this is not a good fit, right? And what I have found personally is people think I'm not a good fit because I rub them different. And I'm saying that is diversity, right? That's what you want. It's like you want the challenging idea that does not come from your background. The other thing that I have found specifically in this is there's not enough intentionality there's not enough trying to make me the owner and executive, right? I use this example when I moved to a certain city. I won't use the name of the city. And I remember going in, and I remember everybody that worked in parking and service were Black. All the executives was white. And I walked in, and I was like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen, right? But I think that there's kind of this predisposed idea of who you are and where you should be, where people don't know what to do unless you operate in that role. And then you do operate in that role, they think you're going to code switch. So one thing you know about me, Cody, is I don't code switch, right? So if you're listening, trying to figure out what code switching is, it basically means I don't switch into a different type of voice. I am who I am. I'm culturally, I'm Black. I bring that into every setting, but I also bring all my other gifts, talents, and education to the setting to where it's like, I'm not going to assimilate in order to be accepted. And I think that one of the challenges is if I don't shave all the facial hair off, right? Shave my hair bald like Cody. If I don't do that and I don't talk with the white boys and I don't do these different things, I don't feel safe. And I think that challenge keeps us from being able to connect across culture, because now it says if BJ does not fit this prototype, he is not a good fit. And I would say that is not true. It is actually the opposite. So I would say those are the things: funding, living in a certain stereotype and prototype, and who do we think actually deserves to be at the table have been the greatest challenges that I have faced as a minority nonprofit organization leader and as a business owner.
So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to make two, I'm going to call them shameless plugs, but just plugs. One, for I think as people listen to this and people in your network listen to this, you and I going back a year and a half, 2 years ago when a lot of this stuff was going on, we were texting and I said, I think you even challenged like, hey, we got to stop talking about stuff and do something. So one of the things that we did is Kansas State University, which is close by, has a great personal financial planning program where you graduate like basically ready to be a financial advisor, which I think is one of the most admirable jobs, but I think also a job as an entrepreneur that has a really high success rate if you have the right support system around you. So we started a scholarship program there. So we do 4 scholarships a year for female or minority students who want to be in financial planning. One of the challenges we have, and the reason I'm plugging it here for everyone who listens, if you know someone who would be interested, is finding candidates, right? A lot of those people don't see being a financial advisor as like this career path or career opportunity, but it's an incredible industry that more people. So shameless plug there. If you know people that would be interested in that, send them our way. Second, and I'm going to use this as a little bit of a transition to talk about some of the things that you're working on with Build a Better Us and the nonprofit side of things that you do there. I know you're really impacting a lot of different lives, and there's some things you're working on you're excited about if people want to hear more about. So will you talk about some of the cool things that you're working on? The one that you and I have connected around a ton, it's a huge area that my wife and I support, but is the idea of orphan care. So talk about some of the things that you're doing there, because it's pretty cool.
No, that's a great question. So I had an eye-opening moment that really got me into this. I was on a call with the director of an orphanage in Uganda. While I was on a call with him, he like showed me this video. He's like, I had a 6-year-old who's sick with malaria. And he said, I don't know what to give him. He has like these pills laid on the bed. And as I sat there watching him, I'm just going like, why are you giving this child random pills? Why not take him to the doctor? And I asked him, I said, why are you not taking this doctor to the medical clinic? And he said, we have no money to take him to the doctor. And Cody, it was like I had this like lightning moment. This child could die from $30, right? And it really kind of sent me in this moment where I just thought, we are living every day with the opportunity to be philanthropic to people around the world who do not have basic needs. They do not have clean water. They do not have food. They do not have adequate shelter. They do not have social services. And here we are living in the 5% greatest wealth in the world, and we're not intentionally directing resources to these people. And so I kind of had a watershed moment with that, where I said, instead of allowing myself to be overwhelmed with every single need, every single person, what if we can specifically put our attention on 25 kids, right? So what led me to the work of working with orphans, and I said, these children have lost both mother and father to famine and illness. Their life expectancy and life outcomes are much more grave because they're growing up in dire poverty. And so we started building this idea of, we could help you gain basic needs, then educational needs, and then your long-term housing needs. What we could do is we could help orphans become leaders, right? So if you stick with a child, you think about this, if you contribute, we say this, I know this is an overused term, what you pay for a cup of coffee per week could actually change and save a child's life. It's not I know that's like an overused term. It's a legitimate thing. And so at missions.buildabetterus.com, we decided that as we grow and scale, we're not only just going to connect people to great products and programs, but we need to connect them to great philanthropy by working with the least of these, helping them gain basic needs so that they can become leaders of their day, right? So we talk about this a lot, Cody. You cannot expect a person to wake up and be a leader. You have to nurture them. You have to develop them. You have to be intentional with them. But you cannot expect the person with no strings on their shoes to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Sometimes we all need a helping hand, and it may not cost you a lot of money, but it does cost you intentionality, and you have to care about others. And so what's driven us to this place of saying we want to do good work is we know that if we can provide a little bit of resources to get kids clean water, food, regular food, and we can help sponsor them in education, that we know that after 15 years, 10 years, we'll look up and that child will be an adult, and that adult will be able to care for a neighborhood, which will be able to care for a community, and then begin to multiply their impact all over the city. And we will see people who will be a blessing to hundreds of thousands of millions of people simply because we just pause a little bit to care. So.
No, and I hope people go check it out. I think you and I have talked about this. We've talked about the trip my wife and I did down to the Dominican Republic to some of the orphan care stuff we do down there. And it's a life-changing experience, man. I wish, with all the things going on in our country, I think everyone should have to go see some of the other countries and the things that people live with, and we'd realize just how fortunate we are. And the other thing, you said something there that I just heard Andy Stanley say this, and he said, do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. And the point he was making is oftentimes you're like, the problems are so big, you don't know where to start. And he's like, hey, just whatever you wish you could do for everyone, start with one person, start with one kid, and, make your difference there. So,
yeah, that's what we ask people to do. We ask them to sponsor one child.
Yep.
That's it. Don't overwhelm yourself.
So if you're listening, you want to go sponsor a child, you can
go to missions.buildabetterus.com. Visit missions.buildabetterus.com. Go ahead.
Okay, buddy. Well, I know we're tight on time, so I want to end with asking you a few lightning round questions. These are the same 5 questions I've asked every single guest that I've had on here. So if you're ready to go, these can be short answers. I know you don't give many short answers, but these are designed to be short answers.
No, you don't get short answers.
Okay. What lesson did you learn in 2020 that you will carry forward for the rest of your life?
You need subscriptions. You have to develop subscriptions that do not depend on you traveling and you being able to be remote. You have to always be remote. You cannot have to be in person at all times.
Perfect. What was the one thing that you have done to graduate from being a good business owner or entrepreneur to a great business owner or entrepreneur? Systems
and consultants. Without consultants, you can't see what's ahead in a way that is very mature. And without systems, you cannot sustain, you cannot scale.
I heard, and you may have listened to it, I know I sent it to you, but Keith Cunningham was on the podcast, and he said...
Please make me and Keith friends. He's incredible.
He said Tiger Woods has a swing coach because he can only see where the ball is going. He can't see the swing that got it there. But he was just talking about the importance of, a great coach sees your swing that you can't see. So big part of that. What are you doing this year to drive your own personal growth that you're excited about?
So I'm doing a lot more rest. I'm doing a lot more reading. And I think one of the things I'm trying to do is connect with my children. I have children that are 18, 14, 12 as of right now. And so they're transitioning out of my house. I want to make sure I have a strong, solid relationship with my children.
Any specific things you're doing around rest that you found helpful? Because I think that's a big, important topic for so many leaders.
So for me, rest is about what recharges you specifically. So I ride my bike. I talk to good friends. I limit how many people I talk to. So if I don't talk to you, it's because you don't rest. I don't feel rest talking to you. I only talk to people who give me a sense of rest.
That's good. Maybe we should go on a fishing trip too. That'd be restful. What is the book that you have recommended most to other entrepreneurs or business owners?
Think and Grow Rich. Another book that I would say is The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was actually an entrepreneur.
Yep.
So The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass and Think and Grow Rich.
Pretty fat. I mean, I know his story's told a little bit more, but probably should be told a lot more than it actually is.
Yeah.
So, okay, final question. what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
That's a hard question. Goodness gracious. The best piece of advice I have had is bet on you. But I don't think you can bet on you until you know yourself. It took me years to understand who I was. And I had to be okay with failing with stuff. I've tried so many different things that it's like almost discouraged me, but I recognized I just needed to continue to try.
Yep.
And as I've continued to try, I've recognized, oh, this is who I actually am. And this is how what I am, who I am speaks to the market.
So back to that quote, after you figure out who you are, don't just bet on yourself, but double down, right?
Oh yeah, double down.
I love it. BJ, my buddy, thank you for taking the time today. If someone wants to learn more about Build a Better Us, or they want to connect with you, let's say online somewhere, what are the different places they can find you?
Yeah, if you want to sponsor a child, again, we want to provide clean water, food, shelter for children. Visit missions.buildabetterus.com. You want to connect with me, you can find me on Twitter at BJ116. I could say anything, so y'all just be prepared. Also, you can find me on Instagram at BJ Thompson 116, or you can email me bj@buildabetterus.com, and we'll talk and we'll connect.
Thank you. Hey, everyone, if you enjoyed this episode of the Business of Advice podcast, do me a favor, go leave a review so other people know this is a valuable use of your time, whatever platform that you're listening to this on. And also make sure you hit subscribe so you'll hear other great guests and know about new episodes when we launch them. BJ, buddy, great to see you and appreciate the time.
Same. Thanks, bro. Great seeing you.